3, 2, 1, and we are live with our first webinar in a very long time. My name is Tomas Sandell. This is the European Coalition for Israel. And the theme for our webinar today is the European elections, 1 week away, everything you need to know, want to know about the EU elections. Together with us, not in the studio, but in the webinar in Brussels, we have Emma Hallali, President of the European Union of Jewish Students, representing 160,000 Jewish students across Europe in 36 national unions. And we have, from France, I should add, which is very important, and we have Christopher Herrmann, a senior official at the European Parliament from Germany, also a political scientist and a historian. So, ladies and gentlemen, and especially Emma and Christopher, we're very happy to have you in this webinar today. And as political animals, we are completely excited with only 1 week to go until the EU elections. This is like preparing for a trip to Disneyland, but a slightly different kind of Disneyland. But also on a very serious note, of course, this is about the future of Europe in a situation when Europe is facing an unprecedented crisis, a crisis on so many different levels. And if we are looking back at the elections 5 years ago, things are very different now with a major war in Europe. And how will the European elections, for example, affect the Russian aggression in Ukraine? But there are also many other questions that will be decided, the direction of the EU. And what is, of course, of a particular interest for us, both those of us here in the webinar and those of you who are listening and watching, is the EU relations with Israel and the situation for the Jewish community in Europe, the rise of anti-Semitism. What can the EU do to combat this ugly hatred? But if we start just by explaining a little bit of who you are, to give the viewers a sense of where you come from and why you are involved in EU affairs. If we start with you, Emma, please can you just present yourself a little bit. I made my own introduction, but I'm sure there's a lot more, many more interesting things that can be said about you. I think yes, Christopher was disappearing there for a moment, but we're happy to have you back. So Emma, if you would just present yourself, how did you become involved in EU politics, and what is it that motivates you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Thomas, and the ECI team in general for organizing this webinar. And yeah, basically, so again, my name is Emma Hallali. I'm from Paris. I was born and raised in Paris, and I moved a bit around. I studied European law. I did a bachelor in European law in France, and I did two masters in Maastricht, Utrecht, and also at the same time in Paris. So that's that I really have this interest in Europe, and I really believe in Europe and the need to have this this organization in general. So I have more of a legal background when it comes to EU politics. And when I entered university in France 6 years ago, I joined the French Union of Jewish Students, where I started my activist, but mostly political activist career, let's say, where I started fighting against discrimination in general, together with the SOS Racism. I don't know if you know this organization, but basically we have this universal fight where I learned how to fight against anti-Semitism, but anti-racism as well. I think it's important to put those two words together, and that we need to have this universal fight against hatred. And this is something that I think we are seeing less and less today, unfortunately. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And so now, as my role as president of the European Union of Jewish Students since last August, I tried to have this political but non-partisan aspect of it as well. This is very important for our work. We try to represent Jewish students that span from the left to the right. So that's me and my involvements.
Thank you, Emma, for giving us an introduction. And Christopher Herrmann, you are born and raised in Germany, but I also understand that you've been traveling and working a lot abroad, and you've been for the last 5 years in Brussels. But what made you choose Brussels with so many other options? There's Berlin, and there are many other exciting cities in the world.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for the invitation today. I'm in Brussels now for almost 6 years. I once decided to come here to work at the European Parliament because I think I like the idea of Europe. I like the idea of a collaboration between the European nations, which is actually getting much more important in these times. And yeah, so as I said, I worked in the European Parliament now for 6 years, 5 of them for MEP Jörg Meuthen, and former leader of the German opposition party, which he left, the AfD. We will discuss it later, most probably. And I was also carrying in his office for foreign affairs and his membership in the economic affairs committee. So yeah, so I think this European politics gives you perspectives which the national level can't give you. And I'm on the one hand, I'm proud to be from Germany. It's a nice country, but I'm also cosmopolitan. I love to be abroad together with other people, the international perspective. And so Brussels was a very good deal, I think.
Thank you, Christopher. We will hear more about the situation in Germany in a few moments, and also the party which you mentioned. But back to you, Emma, and the obvious questions. The European Parliament elections are not drawing the crowds, and we've had many elections where there've been less than 50% of those eligible to vote that have actually bothered to turn up at the polls. And this is given the fact that in some countries it's mandatory to vote, like in Belgium. Why would you say that it is important to vote in these EU elections?
I will take the perspective of a young person, young people in general. I think that young people do not know what the EU is. They do not know, they do not see the interest. Why is it important for us? What does it change in my daily life? So I think that's something that is important to notice, and that's why the EU elections are even more important, because the campaign is the moment where we try to make those people understand why you need to vote, why is it relevant to you. So it's, in particular, when it comes to the Jewish voice in Europe, we led a campaign for the past 6 months. Actually, we started quite early, where we had 2 objectives. The first one was to get the candidates for the elections to sign pledges where they commit to foster a vibrant future for Jewish life in Europe. Let's say that it was a bit easier before 7th of October, and then it got a bit tougher. And the second goal was to encourage our Jewish students to vote. So we prepared some booklets about, again, the relevance of voting and the relevance of those elections. And especially today, when we have this rise in political extremism that we are seeing and facing in every country in Europe, and when we see that our basic European values are really under threat, it's something that should spark interest in people to go vote. And something that I've noticed, and I think it's important to remind, is that yes, we have a democracy, we have a democratic Europe, we have the rule of law that is trying to be implemented, but it can never be taken for granted. And everyone needs to understand that, and I think that's one of the big messages and one of the biggest reason why we need to vote, and the relevance of it.
Yeah, maybe if I may comment on what you just said, and I just read an article recently today about how fragile democracy can be at times. And when we look at the 1930s, nobody in any of the large European democracies would have thought that we were just facing a major war, that National Socialism was to upend the development in the whole world. And of course, it's for us always easy to go back and say, well, that was then. But I think exactly as you say, we have to keep in mind that this could happen anytime. And we see some very worrying signs, not at least the influence from Russia, not only in Ukraine but also throughout Europe in trying to cause disunity and even try to stop the good developments at the NATO. So again, I'm sure we will come back to this question. But Christopher, how would you answer these questions? Why is it important to vote?
I think it's important to vote, of course, because democracy, as you said, is fragile. We can see that from both sides, from the extreme left and extreme right, democracy is more and more under attack in our countries, also on the European level. And secondly, on the European level, after being here for some years, I see that a small minority of people is actually influencing the European Union and its agenda, which is actually not representing the mass, the majority of the people. You can see it in many things EU is caring about, like gender politics, like migration, that we can see that so far a small minority is actually showing the way, while more and more people and the majority of the people actually oppose this. And the European elections are a chance to change this, to make Europe, the European Union, which is a fantastic project, to make it a project of the people again.
Yeah. So you mentioned something which is my next question, and that's and I think very relevant for everyone who are considering should they vote or not vote. What is really at stake here? What are some of the major issues? Emma, do you have a list to say, well, this is what it's all about?
There are so many things, I think, at stake in these elections. I think just like in 2019, first of all, there is the climate change. And I think this is a topic that we didn't see in every parties and in every campaign, which is at the same time, I think, a shame, because this is one of the most pressing issue that will need to be solved. And we all know that the Green Deal is still on the table and that we need to work on that. I would say that when it comes to youth in general, so many things, unpaid internships they have still not being changed. It's still on the table. I know that the current EU commissioner did not do enough. The next EU Parliament will need to do a better work on that. And I mean, you said it. And when it comes to interference and foreign interferences, this is a big issue. And this is something that comes from the far right to the far left. When it comes to China and Russia on the one hand, and on the second hand, we see it in France, for instance, with the far left party that is presenting La France Insoumise, who is presenting Rima Hassan to the EU elections, and that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is her main topic, and she's meeting with Bashar al-Assad every day. She's in Syria. She can come back and forth from Syria without having a problem. And we know that if she gets elected and if they get enough votes, she will enter the parliament. So Syria will have an entry in the parliament, and no one mentioned that. And I think this is something to keep in mind as well.
Wow, that's very interesting. And this is something that we certainly haven't heard about, not following French politics. And I think others would say that Putin may have a few representatives in the next European Parliament if things go according to his plans. But Christopher, how would you look at the priority list?
Yeah, basically, I think they are the most important questions of our time, like mentioned, climate change, migration, but also the idea how the European Union should work in the future. Are just decided on the European level. So it's not decided anymore on the national level. The question concerning climate change, if we want to protect the climate, even if we have to give up parts of our life standard or not, the question of migration, do we want more, do we want less from outside Europe? All these questions are decided on the European level. So every voter has to decide in which direction he wants to go, but he can only express this opinion on the European level because the national parliaments actually have less and less power, we have to say. So this looking in the future, I think it comes more and more from Brussels. So these European elections are getting more important.
So if we stick in Germany for a few minutes then, and obviously you were chosen as panelists because you represent two of the largest EU member states. I'm always of the opinion that Finland is very important also in the EU, but I'm humble enough to realize that France and Germany are really the two leading powers. And in the past, it was due to the close relationship with people like Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand that made the European project a reality. But then we move, and you can comment on both of you on German-French relations, of course, but looking at relations with Israel, with the Jewish community, Germany, of course, goes without saying, has a very special historical bond. Some would say that the new Germany, the raison d'être for Germany, as Merkel would say, was to stand up for Israel. This was to be an unbreakable bond. But how is it, Christopher? Is this a given? Can we expect Germany to remain this solid ally of the Jewish people, of the state of Israel for the next 10 to 15 years?
I would say basically yes, because the German support for Israel is on the one hand historical, due to historical reasons. It's a historical responsibility the Germans feel nowadays, but it's also in most parts of the political class, at least, it's also the conviction that Israel as only democracy in the Middle East has to be supported. And as you said, it's a long history of German support. It started in the 50s when Germany actually financed the early state of Israel, and it hasn't changed actually in the last years. And I have to say that compared to other countries now in the current situation, even under a center-left government, which we have in Germany, actually the support for Israel is still high. Could be more, I have to say. There had been some disputes between our foreign minister and the government in Jerusalem, but basically compared to what France is doing, what Belgium is doing, even more, not to mention Spain or Ireland, that is far away from that. And so actually, I think the German political class fully supports Israel. Even the extreme left and even the extreme right are at least more careful criticizing Israel than in other countries. And also in the population, I would say that when I see what's going on in other countries in Western Europe in the last weeks and months, it's not that extreme in Germany, because many Germans still have also a pro-Israeli stance.
Yes, I'm sure there would be those who, like always, and I think that's one of the virtues of Germans, that they can be also very self-critical. And I know that in the German debate, there are those who would perhaps have a more problematic view and say that for example, with the new government and the government program, that initially there was no mentioning of this doctrine of Angela Merkel of Israel being at the core. But by and large, I hear what you're saying, and I'd like to believe you.
just to clarify it, of course, it could be more, and under earlier governments, it was even more. But if you now can see that even the Greens in Germany are actually under attack by the colleagues in the European Parliament, by other Greens in France, for example, have a much different view on Israel and the conflict, and the German Greens has to justify themselves while still supporting Israel. Yeah. Also the question of arms for Israel actually no political party, one of the large political parties, I'm not talking about the extremists, but the large political is actually questioning the delivery of arms to Israel, in contrast to other countries.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that would always amaze me, that when we look at the green movement, that say France and Germany in this case, they couldn't be more different. But if we come back to, we stay in Germany, excuse us, Emma, for a few more minutes. If we stay in Germany for a few more minutes, looking at these elections, and obviously I was going to say the elephant in Germany is the rise of what some would describe as the extreme right. And we've had some recent incidents, actually from a discotheque in the north of Germany, where there were Nazi salutes. And I think what made people uncomfortable is that it wasn't just any skinheads, but these were very well established, rather upper middle class young people. That on the one hand, and the rise of AfD, Alternative for Germany. And so my question is, because you obviously and your MEP has a special link to this development, and we've had long discussions in the European Parliament, and you have really warned me or us about what is happening in Germany, about the radicalization, as you say, on the left and on the right. Would you want to elaborate on that situation?
Yeah, so concerning, first of all, this latest scandal, which you mentioned, which apparently found its way abroad as well. So some drunk, young, as you say, upper middle class, even rather upper class kids cheering some neo-Nazi slogan from the 80s and 90s, foreigners out. It was not only there, it was some other cases now, because in the last days in the news was several cases at several different parties in Germany where they chanted it as well. I would rather say it's very questionable, but sign of provocation than actual serious right-wing extremism. Because I have to say, when I look at these kids in the video from Sylt, from the island, actually, I think no of them would vote for the AfD, but just that by sides. Concerning the AfD, yeah, it's my MEP was for almost 7 years, I think, in the end, was the leader of the AfD. In a time when this party was totally different. So it was founded only 11 years ago. New parties in the German system are rare. Newly founded parties, for them it's always difficult to have success, but this party made it as second party after the Greens in the 80s, as completely new party to join the Bundestag, the parliament. This party was founded actually just as free market, economically liberal party 11 years ago, criticizing the so-called Euro rescue policy of Angela Merkel. That was actually only the reason this party was built for. And then it started as conservative party with many Christians joining us, who were disappointed with the policy of Angela Merkel in general, which moved her party, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, more and more to the center, some say even to the center left, and gave up conservative values. So it was actually the original reason why this party grew. But the problem of this party was also from the very beginning that it was not formed as classical party, which is actually rather hierarchic, with a hierarchic structure. It was built as basic democratic movement, and where every member has his rights to express, to influence the party. And also in this time, actually the party accepted all members who applied. And so it grew rapidly, but on the other hand, a lot of extremists actually came to this party, and somehow, to make it short, they make it to come in power in this party. And so 11 years ago, it started as free market party with some conservative values. Now I would say it's a Nazi revival party. Just to mention, last week, Marine Le Pen threw them out of the ID group here in the European Parliament. They broke all ties. To be too extreme for Marine Le Pen actually explains everything. And this is actually there when you look at all this, as I'm speaking now as political scientists, right-wing populists in Europe, they all became more moderate in the last years. They become more professional. They try to be part somehow of the political game. The AfD is exactly doing the opposite. It became more radical, louder, more extreme, and it's unbelievable actually what is going on in this party. And also concerning Israel, I think in the last years, the original AfD, if I may say so, was always clearly pro-Israel. Just to mention, my MEP was in your last ranking #1, the most pro-Israel MEP. Now, actually, this party is at least neutral. Some even say we support Hamas. Some out of this party because they say Hamas is fighting the same enemy as us, the West. Look at Tel Aviv; it's full of gays, it's full of liberals. We are fighting this. Hamas is fighting this. Why don't we support this? They're supporting Iran. They're supporting Russia. We have the scandal around the Spitzenkandidat of the EP from the AfD for the European elections, Maximilian Krah, whose assistant has obviously been a Chinese spy for years. Everyone knew here in Brussels, and now it came to an end. His other assistant is now seen as Russian spy, some believe so. He also has some connections to China and other authoritarian regimes like Azerbaijan. So this party totally changed, and I have to say that it's a serious threat to the German democracy, I would say.
Okay, just to say to our viewers again, you can post your questions in the Q&A icon, which you find at the bottom of the screen. So if you have questions, some of you have sent in questions beforehand, but you can still do it during the webinar. Now we lost Christopher Herrmann again. I think he's coming back. So over to France. We were speaking about Germany being the largest EU member state, France being the second largest, but with the largest Jewish community. So that brings me to asking or starting with two questions. On the one hand, how would you say it is to be a young Jewish person in France today, in Paris today? You can't compare to what it was 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, but during your lifetime, and obviously you have had questions with your parents and others in your community, what is your overall assessment? And secondly, when it comes to France, do you have trust in the French Republic in protecting Jewish communities? And secondly, as it relates to Israel, is France a solid ally of Israel, just like Germany? Three questions at once, and I have more once we are through with these. Emma.
So it's a tricky question because I grew up in Paris. I was in middle school when we had the terrorist attack in the Jewish school of Ozara Torah in Toulouse in 2012. I was a Jewish student attending a Catholic school. My parents put me there because it was a great level of excellency, and I never really lived through I never had anti-Semitic experience, and when I heard about this shooting, and we had to respect a minute of silence in my class, and being the only Jew, everyone was looking at me, and I was understanding that there was something that was weird happening, and I think I understood what it meant to be Jewish at this moment. And my parents before that, they were not really scared for my sisters and I when we were young. And suddenly they start fearing. They were like, okay, my Jewish kids are attending this Catholic school, but then we also moved to another school, public school, and it was full of Jews. But at the same time, I could see my parents a bit worried. And let's say that when I was in high school, I also in 2015, I started high school and I had the Bataclan attack. I was in Paris at that night, and it was on a Friday evening. Usually we don't go out on Friday evening because it's Shabbat, and this time my parents agreed to make an exception. So how to say that they had to come to pick me up from Paris in this catastrophic moment. So let's say that I always live with this terror mindset, and the fact that I was Jewish. Bataclan was not necessarily Jewish, but the terrorist threat was something that is really printed in our DNA and how we live through things. And then again, we had the hyper cacher in Vincennes. So all of this is really connected. So I've always felt unsafe in Paris as a Jew, as a young Jew, unfortunately. But I think I stopped being so unsafe when I started university, because I went to Créteil, so it was in the suburbs. It was quite okay. We had a big Jewish community on campus, no problem, especially in the law school, because all of the deans were Jewish, so it was not a big problem on that side. But after 7th of October, thanks God, I was, and I'm still not a student. I relived through all those terror things, you know, the fact that when I was in high school, I couldn't, we couldn't go smoking in front of the high school. It's forbidden in France to smoke inside a high school, but because of the terrorist threats, they had a special law to make the students smoke inside so that they don't have to gather in front, which is crazy when you think about it. And after 7th of October, I refound this mindset of being scared everywhere I'm going, basically, having like this target on my back, on my forehead, saying that I'm a Jew. And not gonna lie, especially in the position I am today, I'm quite exposed, and I can see my parents from France not super happy about it. In Brussels, it's the same. I'm not gonna lie, from Paris to Brussels, I think in Brussels it's even worse than Paris at the moment. Regarding your second question regarding Israel, regarding France in general and the ties, I think that France has always had long historical and cultural ties with Israel. They've always been a close friend of the state. They've always defended the right of Israel to exist. And we see it also with the big French population in Israel, and that they have also a duty to safeguard their own citizens over there. They've always condemned any kind of terrorist attacks, and especially the 7th of October. France was the only country who held a ceremony for the victim of 7th of October. I was in Israel last week, and we had meetings, and we met with President Herzog, and himself said that France was one of the European countries that is the most fighting for the hostages, and in particular for the 3 remaining hostages, the French hostages in Gaza. So I think it's also reassured the French community, because we don't see that. I think that France is also very scared of its own population. If we're being super honest, France has 6 million of Muslim at least 6 million of Muslim people in their country. We all know that France has this culture of demonstrating and destroying everything when we are not happy. And you see that the government also has to keep the population united, but I think it's very complicated. I think the government itself is acting in the best way possible. Macron sometimes has to condemn what Israel is doing, and I mean, we are also condemning sometimes, and it's important to be balanced. But I think that the danger comes at the moment from the far left. And I forgot your third question.
No, I think that sums it up, because I have a new question to you, and this is a question from the audience. So as we reminded that people can ask questions, because you are in a very good strategic position to have an overview of all these 36 countries that are represented. And someone is asking here how, if you look at these 36 countries, which are particularly difficult right now, and where is it, you know, where the Jewish people have an easier time, and other reasons for this disparity. I'm sure that there are no countries where Jews feel unaffected by what is happening, but you would have a good view. So what are your thoughts?
Sure. So especially on campuses, after 7th of October, we conducted 2 reports of the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses after 7th of October, and we could see the trend and where the reports were mostly coming from, knowing that, of course, it was also based on the willingness of people to report. So it's not as representative as we would have preferred to have it. But at the moment, we see, and we've seen also before 7th of October, that in Eastern Europe, in Eastern European countries, anti-Semitism is less present. When you go to Hungary, when you go to Czech Republic, it is starting on campuses in Czech Republic. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm saying that this is not as present as in the Netherlands, as in France, the UK, and Germany. And also in Germany, when you look back, it's present, but not as much as in other countries either. And you see the violence also on campuses. In Austria, for instance, the violence on campuses. Here in Belgium, you see the president of the Belgian Union of Jewish Students being strangled because he came with the Israeli flag to one of the he wanted to counter protest. So we are in this thing where actually no campus is safe. It can happen tomorrow. Sometimes you think your campus is the safest place in the world, but you're never sure of that, unfortunately. So yeah, again, I would say Eastern Europe, and in particular Czech Republic and Hungary.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful also for our viewers. I get more questions here, and I think I will navigate a bit, because I think the next question actually deals with what I wanted to ask to both of you as my next question. And that is what we, looking at the predictions of the upcoming elections, what is widely expected is that the right wing, extreme right, the hard right, now they make a distinction with the EPP being what many would call moderate right, and the ECR group then more hard right, I think some would say, and then they make the distinction. There's still a group which is they call extreme right, and this may only make sense for people who really study EU politics. But the idea that some parties are exempted from having any leadership role in the EU is something that we learn French as we go along with cordon sanitaire. I think most people who don't speak much French, they have come across this term, which basically means that in the political system, certain parties, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying that would be on the extreme right, would be disqualified. At the same time, and this is a question from the audience, what a pro-Israel ranking which we did and launched in April, and you will see a link to this ranking in the chat box, so you can go in and look for yourself, revealed something which was perhaps quite annoying both for the State of Israel and many in the Jewish communities, but nevertheless showed that people in this right of center bloc tend to be significantly more pro-Israel than those left of center. And the question here that someone is asking is, how do you feel about this? And is this a problem? And what are your comments? Is this something that the ranking, the research, the data was inaccurate, or other ways of explaining it? Maybe I'll start now with Christopher, and then we come back to you, Emma, in just a few moments.
Yeah, I think it's as you can see, we all can see in your ranking. It's and also looking back in the last years working here in the European Parliament, especially in the last month, when many votes on the conflict in the Middle East were on the table of the Parliament, is that the center-right and right-wing parties tend to be pro-Israel, and the center-left and leftist parties tend to be more pro-Palestinian side. That's a fact. It's actually, you cannot change it. So I just remember a couple of weeks ago when there was a resolution in the European Parliament, and some Green MEPs refused to vote for an immediate release of all hostages left in Gaza, but they voted for immediate help for suffering animals in Gaza, for stray cats and dogs. It was from the Greens, from the leftists. They voted for this, but not for an immediate release of the hostages. So just to mention it. Of course, it's a problem which I can see. It's also looking at the media, and especially in the mainstream media here in Europe. The current government in Israel, I won't comment on it. It's just a question of the Israeli citizens to judge the current government in Jerusalem. But it is a right-wing government, and some media in Europe actually combine this character of the government with the question if one should support Israel or not, and also can see some commentators in Germany who said, yeah, actually Israel is a good country, but the current government is so bad, so actually we cannot support it. This is actually, so I think that this is a very difficult question to put Israel in some kind of right-wing box, because it's more, of course, and it's a question beyond political borders, beyond political parties, actually. But yeah, the fact is that center-left currently and leftist parties, the left-wing extreme especially, are simply criticizing Israel more, or even more against Israel, which is also maybe just part of their strategy towards elections, because leftist voters tend to protest against Israel. Migrants from Muslim countries, many as in France, tend to vote rather left. So of course, for these parties, it's difficult to oppose Israel's stance. It's just a fact. I think it's not optimal, but it's hardly to change now, the short notice.
Maybe I can comment as someone who commissioned the research. Obviously, it was EUeMatrix, a very reputable research institute in Brussels, who came up with the data. But of course, what the data does not measure is attitudes towards the domestic Jewish communities. So when it comes to kosher slaughter, for example, or circumcision, and here there is a different trend where some of the same parties which would be very pro-Israel at the same time would be less pro-Jewish. And I think, just as a disclaimer, it's important to point this out. And we said in our next ranking we may find a way of including this. But over to you, to Paris, I was going to say.
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on what you said, because I completely agree. There is something that we need to understand. I think it was this morning I saw the video, or maybe it was from yesterday. Marine Le Pen, she said on TV that the Rassemblement National has always been Zionist. They've always been pro-Jewish state. Of course, they've always wanted to have the Jews, to kick out the Jews from France. So it makes sense for them. And that's where we need to also be careful when we praise those far-right parties that are pro-Israel. Yes, they are pro-Israel because they have an agenda. They have this agenda that they all know that the Jewish community is not a fan of the Muslim community. So they are also playing the migrant and the migration card there, that they will have the vote from the Jews, and they will first kick out the Muslim and the Arab community. But we all know that afterwards it's the Jews. And in particular in France, it's very complicated because the community is voting far right. And we're trying to show them, and we're trying to prove them that this is not good for them. And you mentioned ritual slaughter, and Shrita in general. The Rassemblement National is also pro ritual slaughter, and they are praising and they are justifying it with animal welfare. But again, we all know that they have an agenda behind that. So this is something that the xenophobic agenda of those far-right parties needs to be on the table, and everyone needs to know what they are voting for. And Christopher, you mentioned also a lot extreme left, and yes, they are the ones that are the more critical of Israel. Yesterday, I was attending a youth debate on the EU elections, and the socialist representative and the Green representative were only talking about Israel and Palestine. This is the only way they have the votes. This is the only conflict that are of interest for young people. The Uyghurs, who cares? What happened to the Syrian population? No one cares. And I can go on, and this is terrible to see that happening. So when we speak about the cordon sanitaire, yes, we need to have a cordon sanitaire for the far right, but I think especially today, we need to extend it to the far left as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we're having a very balanced discussion where we are really looking at every perspective. I can't remember who made this comment about where do we draw the line, and it was said that it would have to be done case by case, party by party, because also as it relates to the Israeli government, this list tend to be fluid. But I think it's good in this conversation that we bring up, and I completely agree with what is being said, that things are often more complex and complicated than what they look at the first glance. I had included a question about looking domestically at France, about Marine Le Pen and the prospect of Marine Le Pen as the next French president. And you mentioned, even to my surprise, that the community is not completely against this, but rather there are many who are on that side. What would be your general comments on France? In what direction is France moving now ahead of the EU elections, and then we have a presidential election coming up, of course, also.
So at the moment, when it comes to the EU elections, we see that campaign speaking, the majority group is doing a terrible job. Honestly, they did not put the best candidate to represent the government and to represent Macron's party. And we see that Jordan Bardella, so leading the Rassemblement Nationaliste, has twice the intention of votes that the majority group. Which is, I think, a shame. And I think we know it. We know that Rassemblement National, the far right, will make the most votes in France. And we are trying to convince people to vote and to change the balance. But I don't know to what extent it will be possible if we are being realistic here. So once they, unfortunately, win the EU elections, the next elections are the presidential one in 2027. Unless there is a candidate that pops up like Macron did in 2017, far right will win. Marine Le Pen will win. I have my doubts still with Mélenchon in general, because I think it's also gaining a lot of power, and we saw it in the last election. But extreme in general will win, because it seems that the center left, center right, unfortunately got destroyed with this idea of Macron's party, which I think was not a bad idea 5 years ago. But today, I think it led some space to the extreme and to the political extremism. So yeah, like people are like the Jewish people, the Jewish community in France are very disappointed with the government. They said that they are being they are being supported, they are being protected, but not enough. Not enough. They are criticizing the immigration policies, and they just think that the only person that can stop it and can protect the Jewish community is either Marine Le Pen or Éric Zemmour from Reconquête, that he's also leading a list with the niece of Marine Le Pen to the EU elections. So that will be also a question mark to see the score, the final score.
Yes, we are drawing to an end, and I know especially you, Emma, you'll have to run at a certain time for another commitment. So it's probably good to come to the final questions, because we covered a lot of ground already, and I'm really grateful for your input and your wise remarks, both from Germany and France. There is a question here about the EPP group, and the question is more or less, how is the EPP group Is the EPP group a good ally of Israel? That means the European People's Party. And I think without going into too much of an analyzing the situation, I would again make reference to the Israel ranking, and you have the website here in the chat box. And when you read it, as we said, it's good to have this as a disclaimer that would we include domestic issues, that ranking may look a little bit different. And I think one of the conclusions also, which both of you made, is that we see problem on the extreme left, on the extreme right, and I think this is something that we need to be aware of. I think also something which we haven't. That's actually a question, and maybe we'll take this question having to do with Ukraine. I mean, obviously, if I would answer the question, what is the most pressing issue? Looking at Europe now, I would probably, as a Finn with the longest land border with Russia, I would say Ukraine. And the question to both of you, how do you see this planning out, and how will the EU elections affect what happens in Ukraine? And we have more or less five minutes to go. So if you just take a quick 1 minute reply on that, and Emma, we can start with you.
Sure. I think that, again, the foreign influence from Russia will have an impact on Ukraine, and all the efforts of the enlargement as well, and the fact that we wanted Ukraine to enter the EU and everything, and other country. And I think the safety of the continent in general will play a big role if more Russian spies, as you mentioned earlier, or this influence is actually is becoming prominent.
Yeah, Christopher.
Yeah, I would say the basic part of the European Union of the last years to support Ukraine won't change, even if we see that the right-wing parties are getting more in power. But it's also very difficult because some of them support Ukraine, very few still are rather on the Russian side, on the extreme right side, also extreme left. But this basic path it won't change, and in the end, the most important questions, like currently more arms in general to Ukraine, enlargement, are not a question which primarily has the European Parliament to decide, but the national governments and the European Council. So in this direction, the European elections don't affect that process that much.
Yes. So we have a number of questions which we cannot, for the sake of neutrality, answer, and that is, people are coming from a certain region. They ask us who should they vote for. There's one from a French region. There's another one from a German region. And obviously, what we can do is to refer them again to the Israel ranking. But I think also to be active this last week, ask questions directly to the candidates. This is an excellent opportunity to go out to meet face-to-face candidates, be in direct contact with the party bureaus and ask them pointed questions. But at any rate, it is very important that all of us, that we use our vote. And I think this is a responsibility that we have, both for those who once fought for freedom in Europe and for the future generation. So with this concluding remark, I want to thank Emma Hallali and Christopher Herrmann for spending this hour, making all of us so much more intelligent and wiser and more knowledgeable when it comes to the EU elections. And if there are additional questions, you can always mail them to ECI. And I would also ask those of you who are not subscribing to our website, to our newsletter, to go on our website and just simply subscribe, and you will get more information. And I'm sure the same is true if they're a Jewish student here in the webinar, that you should get in touch with Emma in Brussels and the National Union in Finland and in whatever country you are. So I think with this note, I want to say thank you also to all of our to our audience. This will be recorded, so we will also be able to pass it around for people to watch it later. So with only 1 minute left, this will leave Emma lots of time to run to her next appointment, which I believe is in exactly 1 minute. And for Christopher, I'm not sure what your plans are for this evening in Helsinki. It's hot, tropical, hot weather. So I'm planning to take off my jacket and go out and have a swim. And but I hope to see you at another webinar very soon. So from Helsinki and Brussels, we say adios and see you next time.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye.